You'll get hundreds more of those, huh? Well, good afternoon. Buenas tardes. Bienvenido. How many other languages would we need to speak just in this room? The mission of the Primary Care Associate Program is threefold. And hopefully you who are students, you selected this program because of that mission. And that mission, I'll spell out for those of you who don't know it. To educate PAs for clinical practice in primary care and medically underserved communities in California. The second is to increase the enrollment and deployment of underrepresented minorities. And lastly, to respond to the needs of our communities and stakeholders, including Stanford Medical Center. Now, I think I was invited to give this speech partly because I exemplified the mission by having graduated and within 2 weeks moving out of the state. After 4 years, I left rural Arkansas and went to South America. So in that first point of attending the underserved communities in California, I went a long ways away. But I believe there's a universality in the mission that we're about. And here I am again, back in California. Black hole, magnetic pull back. So while I don't think I represent either the underserved minorities that are recruited for this program, I take great pride that that's what this program is about, because that's really what we need. It's much more appropriate for people to deal with people in their own language, understanding their culture, their values, than for those of us who have to run to catch up frequently. And I trust that this mission that we share as colleagues, and I say that though you haven't graduated, as sisters and brothers, in this amazing task of to heal the sick and the injured, to prevent unnecessary suffering, and to build common good is what we're all about here today. I left here to go to Arkansas, not for vacation, but to open up the first Spanish-speaking clinic in Northwest Arkansas. It's an area where people were brought up without documents, oftentimes brought to the U.S. in direct collusion by those who run the poultry industry. People without documents said they could work in underpaid jobs with no insurance, with almost no benefits, and being fired at will. After 9/11, I was moved to do something else. Like many of you, I was really harshly just called by that horrendous crime that day to feel, what can we do about it? And I was really moved by the first couple of weeks after that, watching the destruction of the towers and what happened to the Pentagon and the plane in Pennsylvania. I was watching it in our clinic during the day, and as many of you, just questioning what would cause people to do that type of horrific action against our center of economic power, political power, military power. And so the first couple of weeks after that, I don't know if you remember, but there was a lot of introspection and reflection before we got on a very strong war footing. And so that caused me to change my own path. As I like to say, just working in rural Arkansas with the medically underserved people without documents, there just wasn't enough social justice in it. So I decided I'd go to South America, further away from that pole to California, where we're being trained to serve, to work in a war zone, but one I was more familiar with the war in Colombia, and to train people, just as we're training people here. The slight difference is that nobody who I trained had more than a high school education. And you can say, what kind of primary care can you do? I really believe in the mission of training people to share their knowledge. And in that case, within 4 years, the people we worked with won the top prize for primary care in the Americas in voluntary primary care. So there's a great deal that can be done through your work here, through your work elsewhere. This is what we're about sharing our knowledge and sharing our skills to benefit those who are most in need. From there, I did return back to California, and as you know, California has its own difficulties. I came to work as team leader at the Family Health Center of the San Francisco General Hospital. And things are a lot different there. We have running water, we have electricity, we have elevators that work frequently, we have roads, lots of things we didn't have in Colombia. And yet suffering can't be compared. The suffering in San Francisco is no different than it is in East Palo Alto, than it is in rural parts of California, than it is in anywhere in the world. We just can't compare it. And I know that that's what you're about. And I know that's why you're proud to be here, because we're a program about serving the underserved. You were selected, the students here who were selected from a very large number of people who would love to be in your shoes today. You were chosen to participate in this really dramatic life mission. And I like the way that was summed up by the architect of modern social science, Émile Durkheim, who was a Frenchman, who wrote a book called, a treatise called The Sacred and the Profane. And once you start doing clinical work, and for those who have done it in the past, you know very much this experience. Because it's a sacred place to be where people trust us. It's a sacred place where people are going to open up and tell you about their worst fears, their worst pains, the things they've hidden inside their entire lives. And that's where you're there to hold that and be that for them. You're going to have a sacred place to touch them in the places where they feel ugliest, the places where they feel most hurt, the most pain, the most incapable, and the most unknowledgeable. It's a sacred place to give them hope, to give them the news of the first life that's being brought about, an embryo in someone, or to give them the news that their life is coming to a close. Sometimes you'll experience that in the same hour with the people you work with. It is a sacred place, but there's also the profane that's part of our work. And work with the underserved, you'll see that too. Your commitment will bring others' bodies to you close when they're sick or when they're well, sometimes bringing you to the point of nausea. When you're dealing with a homeless person who hasn't bathed in 2 months and you have to examine their feet. When you're working with the diabetic whose ulcerations you have to put your hand into. When you're working with the people who have had tremendous loss or who can't even grasp that they're there with you because of their schizophrenia or their psychosis. And that's the profane, the mundane of everyday lives of other people, whether they're present with us in their mind or not. So this is where your spirit and our spirits meet life. So I'm glad that you're there with us in that struggle. Don't become inured to people's suffering as you learn the techniques of how to train, how to heal them. Use your intellectual capacity to discern wisely. Use your emotional compassion to listen to the heart that's behind the words that people recount to you. And use your commitment to deepen your understanding and to care for the people, their bodies, and the world around you. You're in the right field to do that. There's a doctor by the name of Kevin Brumback who happens to be the head of the department I work at. And when I Googled primary care for the underserved, his came up as the third article. I didn't realize that, but he's quite well known for this. And he wrote in 2003 that there's one profession in the medical world that consistently provides support for the medically underserved. It's physician assistants, number 1 or number 2 in every state in the United States. Those who are dedicated to the medically underserved are PAs. That's a wonderful place to be. That's a great source of pride for everyone here. Now, close behind us are nurse practitioners, nurse midwives, and a great effort by many of the residencies in this area to have family practice that tries to keep all of us as medical professionals in line with serving those who are in such need. And when I talk about such need, I'm talking about a lot of people. We're talking about 50 million people in the US with no insurance right now. So as you graduate this class of 50 people, that means only 1 million each. Actually, it'll only feel like that some days. But that travesty will be existing through our entire lives. 45,000 people die every year because of a lack of insurance in this country. 1 every 12 minutes since I've been here, a person has died for lack of insurance in the United States. We have many underserved people in prisons. There are 12,000 people in prison in California today on a hunger strike because the conditions are so horrific. 12,000 people, it's hardly in the news right now. The Supreme Court had to come down and say it's inhumane, cruel and inhuman punishment to be in a prison in California right now. Those are people we need to serve. African Americans in Washington, D.C. suffer worse infant mortality than in Cuba. That's a travesty. The United States is number 37 in the world in terms of healthcare, yet number 1 in terms of spending. That's a travesty. It's 191 countries counted in that, and we're number 37, in spite of these immense costs. We have a lot to do, not just in terms of our clinical work, but in terms of gathering together as community and as country to bring that about as change. And so as you're pummeled with all this knowledge you have to learn about where do I fit in the world in terms of angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2 and aldosterone and the renin. It's hard to get your nose out of that sometimes. Don't fall into the trap of just learning about the illnesses in that horrible maxim that I heard one time. I learned about a very interesting illness attached to an uninteresting appendage. The people are what we're about. We're here for their lives and their spirits. And you're in good company to do that. You have hundreds of thousands of colleagues. Many of the people in the room are your colleagues, but you have many other colleagues. Don't forget the nurses, the medical assistants. Don't forget the janitors, the ones who are picking up the bloody gauze behind you, the MDs, the specialists. It's a teamwork. And for those of us who worked in the jungle and had to work alone, it's a gift. And while you may complain about, I wish I had this test available, we need to do the best with what we've got. So be a sponge, absorb as much as you can, apply all the knowledge that you've had to put it into practice for this benefit of others. Don't fall into the trap of entitlement, to think that I deserve it. I'm here in these halls, I'm here at Stanford, they have to give me, because my best hope for everybody here, faculty and staff accepted, is that you leave. Because that's where we need you. We need you in places where we don't have the vast economic wealth, where we don't have these trappings of power, where we don't have all that's handed to us on a plate. So entitlement is something we all need to struggle against while we're here. I've been privileged and burdened in working in war zones, as I said. And I've learned that there are people who spend their entire lives committed to learning how to better kill, to better torture. We read about it in the news, and we can hardly believe it, at least I can hardly believe it when I'm actually confronted with people who spend their lives doing that. And today, we're about the opposite of that. It brings me really to the point of tears to be here with you, to people who are only committed to good. You're only committed to healing. You're only committed to the betterment of the world. And that is a gift to celebrate today. And one last point I'll bring up. I wouldn't be myself if I didn't remind people to rabble rouse while you're here. I was known for that when I was in the program. I was only arrested once for civil disobedience while I was in the program. But part of our work also needs to be about social justice. When I went out to Arkansas, we held the first demonstration against the Ku Klux Klan that had ever been held in that part of Arkansas 10 years ago. So we need to be part of that social justice movement while we're being part of learning about this caring for others. So go out into this world after today and after you graduate to work for peace, to be of good courage, hold on to everything that is good, return to no one evil for evil, strengthen the fearful, support the weak, help the suffering, and honor all people. I look forward to serving in that way with you.